So now we are going to continue on with the Journey to Nowhere. And we are on the chapter called Mountain Screamer. Really wondering what that's about, so let's find out. I ran back to the spot where I thought the locket was lost. I swished my hand through the muddy water, hoping to feel the cold metal, but there was nothing. I checked each puddle, dropping to my knees and running my fingers along the bottom, but I found only pebbles. I couldn't give up. It had to be here somewhere. I tried to picture where our wagon had stood, but I didn't have a clear memory of it. Mama had been holding her shawl over Joshua's head and mine when we dashed through the rain. I went back to the tavern door and imagined Mama, Joshua, and me standing there, watching for Papa. Then I ran to the spot where the wagon had been. The second I plunged my hand into the puddle at my feet, my fingers closed around the locket. I wiped it on my skirt and examined the clasp. It wasn't broken after all, but it must have been weak enough to spring open when I snagged it on something. I went back to the tavern entrance and carefully opened the locket. The 3 locks of hair were dry. I clasped the locket around my neck and slipped it down the front of my dress. Having Grandma's locket again made me feel that everything would be all right. Sure enough, I heard a wagon coming from the direction Mama and Papa had disappeared. Good. It hadn't taken them long to discover I was missing. I couldn't wait to see them again, even though we'd been separated only a short time. I didn't like being abandoned in the wilderness. When the team of oxen came into view, I ran out into the rain. Here I am, I called, but it wasn't Mama and Papa. It was an old man and his wife, and they didn't look any too friendly. Embarrassed, I ran around the side of the tavern to hide. I leaned up against a tree with a huge scar down its trunk from a lightning strike and waited until my heart stopped pounding in my ears. I listened carefully. I didn't hear anyone, so I figured it would be safe to get back on the road. I surely didn't want Mama and Papa to drive by without seeing me. I headed in the direction of the road, climbing over the huge roots of trees that wove back and forth across the forest floor. At home, you could find the road from the light coming in overhead, but that didn't work here because the canopy of leaves was almost solid. I had been walking for what seemed like hours and still had found no road. Had I gone in the wrong direction? What happened to me? What would happen to me if I couldn't find it? The back of my throat started to tighten, and I choked up with sobs. Don't be afraid, I said out loud. It made me feel safer to hear my voice, as if somebody were there with me. Just think what Papa would do. He'd stay in one place and listen until he heard something on the road. The rain was almost stopped, so I should be able to hear a wagon if I haven't wandered too far away. I let that last awful thought slide in and out of my mind without dwelling on it. And that's not the only clue. There should be smoke from the tavern chimney. Try to smell the smoke. I strained my ears and nose. There was a heavy silence around me and the scent of wood and moss, not the faintest hint of smoke. I made a guess at where the road was and then struck out toward it in a straight line. My stomach started making rumbling noises, and I remembered I hadn't had anything to eat since last night's stew. Mama had pulled me away from that before I had even half finished. The 2 tiny bites of mush this morning didn't count as a meal. I decided that after I found the road, I'd retrace my steps to the tavern. I was sure Papa and Mama would be looking for me there. I could hide from the drovers until I saw my parents or our wagon, or maybe the tavern owner would protect me and help me find my family. After all, they kept a lot of people under control that came to visit the tavern. It was a good plan, but there was one problem. I couldn't find the road. In Connecticut, there were fences and buildings to use as landmarks. Here, there was nothing but trees. I didn't know how long I had been walking. Usually I could tell what time it was by meals. I would get hungry around noon and again by 6 o'clock when we had our supper. But I had started out this day hungry, so I couldn't use that as a clue. Also, the branches overhead didn't let in much light even in the middle of the day, so I couldn't tell the time by the sun. But judging from the way my feet had begun to blister in my wet shoes, I was sure I had been walking a better part of the day. Suddenly, I recognized a tree with a huge scar down its trunk from a lightning strike. My starting point. I had done nothing more than walk in a big circle and was no closer to the road than I had been before. I noticed a tree stump with a scooped out top that held rainwater. I cupped my hands and drank my fill. It helped to take away my hunger. Now there was another problem. At first I thought it was my imagination, but now I saw it as fact. The light was dimming fast. Whether I liked it or not, I was going to spend the night alone in the woods. I needed to find a place where I could be safe before it got any darker. That's when I spotted a huge maple, an old maple with a trunk that was as thick as I was tall. On one side there was a huge hole, big enough for me to climb through, probably from another lightning strike, and the center of the tree was hollowed out like a room. It would make a good shelter from the rain. I climbed inside to see if I'd fit. The floor of the little room was covered with dry leaves. It would be soft enough for a bed, but I'd probably be too frightened to sleep. I looked out at the forest with its darkening shadows. If an animal came along, a wolf or a bear, I'd be trapped. I needed something to fill the hole in the trunk so nothing could get at me. I climbed out of the tree and started looking around. There were fallen branches of all sizes on the ground. That gave me an idea. Papa had once made a grape arbor for Mama out of saplings he cut. He wove them together the same way Mama made baskets. He didn't use a single nail, but the saplings made a strong arbor and held a heavy crop of grapes. I had no way to cut saplings, but I started gathering branches that were thick enough to be strong and others that were thin enough to bend. Weaving the branches together wasn't as easy as it had been for Papa. For one thing, his saplings were greenwood, so they bent easily. My dead branches snapped when I tried to bend them. Then I saw some vines on a nearby tree. I pulled down several good lengths and used them to weave the branches together until I had a solid, flat piece, a little larger than the hole I was trying to cover. By the time I was finished, the light was almost gone. The hunger pains in my stomach reminded me I should drink more before settling in for the night. I went back to the stump and tried to scoop water with my hands, but the rain had slowed down so most of it had seeped through the wood. I tried to sip the last of the water like a cat lapping milk from a saucer. It had a punky taste, like the smell of rotting wood, but I knew I needed to drink it anyway. Then I took my woven door to the tree and climbed in, pulling it behind me. It took a little pushing and yanking to get it to fit, but I finally wedged it into place. The leaves from the vines filled the spaces between the branches, so I didn't think I could be seen from the outside. For the first time since I'd fallen out of the wagon, I felt safe. I tried not to worry about how I was going to find my family. First, I needed to find the road, and I'd work at that task again tomorrow. At least I'd be rested by then, and maybe my clothes would dry out overnight. Mama and Papa had probably made it to the tavern by now and would be searching for me at first light. I curled up on the leaves, thinking this bed was as comfortable as some we'd found in the taverns that we had stayed in. I was just drifting off to sleep when there was a rustling noise high above me in the hollow trunk. A few small pieces of rotted wood dropped on me. Something else was in the tree besides me. I jumped up and pulled the edge of my door so I could squeeze through the opening and run if the thing attacked me. Then I heard it climbing down the outside of the trunk. It was big, whatever it was, because it broke off a good-sized branch in the rush to get to the ground. Was it running away from me or coming down to get me? It was frozen in place, not knowing if I had time to escape. Maybe I could pull the door down on top of me so the beast couldn't get at me. But how long would that work? If it was a bear, it could tear apart my crude door in minutes. I heard a thud on the ground, followed quickly by another. The animal must be huge to have feet that big. I held my breath, but there were no more heavy footsteps, only a skittering through the leaves. I looked out. The moonlight was breaking through the trees in a few places. I could barely make out a round, dark shape moving across the ground. Then it reached a patch of moonlight, followed by another moving shape. That's when I could see that my big bare feet were part of frightened raccoons. I wedged my door into place again and sat on the leaf-covered floor. Even though my fears hadn't come true this time, I knew there were dangerous animals out there in the darkness. I wished I had thought to pick up a big branch to use as a weapon, but I was too afraid to go back out now. I would stay hidden and hope that no animal would catch my scent and come to find me. I sat there shivering in my wet clothes and listened to the silence of the woods, only it wasn't silent. Every now and then there was a sharp crack of a stick. Sticks didn't just break on their own. They had to be stepped on. I was straining my ears to hear what was moving around when a woman's scream split the silence. It made the hairs stand up on the back of my neck. Could it have come from the tavern? If I ran toward the sound, would I find people? Or would I even get more lost, trying to make my way through the woods in the dark? Then I felt something that almost made my heart stop beating. Something very large had leaped up into the branch of my tree. This was no raccoon. The tree had shivered with its weight when the thing landed. A breeze blew in through my makeshift door. I hoped it wouldn't change direction, carrying my scent to the creature that was sharing my tree. I held my breath, peeking through the spaces in the door, but I couldn't see what was above me. The moon was bright now, and I could make out 2 shapes coming toward me through the woods. When they got closer, I could see they were young deer. They moved cautiously, stopping to check the air for signs of danger. Just as they started to move on, the thing in the tree sprang, knocking down one of them. Wonder what it could be. It would be jumping on a deer. It was a huge cat. It had to be a mountain lion. I'd never seen one, but I had heard Grandpa tell stories about them. That's what had made the shriek I had heard. Back home they call them mountain screamers. The big cat grabbed the head of the deer with her paws and twisted it. Oh, the deer kicked for a short time and then it laid still. The mountain lion was eating the deer. I started to cry. The huge cat lifted her head, looking right at me, at the tree. Her ears swiveled back and forth, trying to catch the noise that I had made when I was crying. I clamped both hands over my mouth and didn't breathe. Then the mountain lion raised her muzzle and sniffed the air. The strong smell of the deer must have hidden my scent because she went back to eating the deer. Tears ran down my cheeks as I watched, but I stayed perfectly still. Finally, the mountain lion had eaten her fill. She pawed the dirt and leaves over the deer to hide what was left. She took one look back at my tree, sniffing the air again, and then bounded off into the darkness. I was safe for the moment, but I knew that as long as that lion's meal was hidden here, she wouldn't be far away. Wow, that was quite a chapter. Emma's by herself in the wilderness trying to find her parents, trying to get back on the road, and she doesn't know which way to go. Well, the next chapter that you'll hear about is called Snakebite. So I'll be excited to jump into that chapter soon.